Hi and welcome to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast for athletes, coaches and professionals who want to achieve their goals faster. I'm David Charlton and I'll be sharing proven methods from leading athletes, coaches and experts that will help you get the most from your talent. Today's show is sponsored by Functional Intelligent Training, who are a sports injury clinic located in Auxerre near Newcastle upon Tyne and specialise in athlete development, nurturing future champions, strength and conditioning support and excellent rehabilitation services. This episode is a must if you're a young footballer who's got dreams to play professionally in the lower leagues or at the highest level. You're going to get some top quality advice from an experienced ex-professional footballer. We touch on lots of elements of mental toughness, from interpersonal confidence, so how you deal with difficult people, be that teammates, coaches, managers, how you assert yourself when there's criticism, confidence, so confidence in your ability, and how you can remain fearless and driven. Then we've got challenges. In professional football, you're going to be faced with challenges left, right and centre. So being able to keep perspective and have a flexible mindset is so important. And these tips and stories that are linked to all of this are coming from an ex-professional footballer, someone who's been in the sport, in the game for over 19 years, and he's represented Leeds United in the Premier League. I was delighted to speak to Jamie Forrester, who gave some fantastic advice. Enjoy. Could you tell me about your experiences of playing overseas, firstly in France at a young age and then in Holland?
Yeah, there was myself and Kevin Sharp. We both left school actually in England and went straight over to play in France for Auxerre. They'd scouted us a year or two beforehand when we were playing for England schoolboys. And the club at that time were very much pioneers in bringing young players through into first teams. They're still now famous for bringing Eric Cantona through their system and many, many other players that have gone on to represent the first team and also the French national team. So even in the late 80s, early 90s, they were proactive in getting the best young players from all over Europe. And they wanted people from England because they perceived English players to have a fighting spirit that French players didn't necessarily have. So their perception was, we'll get some English players that will bring the fighting spirit over to France, add that with our technical ability that we promote in French players, and we should have the perfect player, which in theory sounds great. Unfortunately, we were a bit young to go. We missed home quite a bit. It was very, very intense. It was the first real days of an academy, long before they had them in this country. And we only stayed a year, unfortunately, and very much from a sort of missing home and family perspective, sort of brought us back.
Did it improve you as a footballer, do you think? Yeah,
technically, massively improved me as a footballer. Tactically, improved me as a footballer. And it also outlined, when you're in it full time, what is really needed. It was a bit of a stark message. It was very, very intense. When you add in French lessons, from 7 o'clock in the morning all the way up till evening sessions at 6 o'clock at night, the day was very, very long. But yeah, I mean, it was something that I certainly don't regret doing, even though it didn't particularly work out from a life experience perspective.
And from there, you ended up moving on to Leeds, is that right?
Yeah, came back to Leeds. Yeah, it was. We went on trial to Everton and Leeds. Everton wanted us both. Leeds wanted us both, but it was Leeds that were prepared to pay a fee. So that's where we went.
And when you went to Leeds, was that more so in the youth setup? And then did you work your way through? Because obviously you played for the first team. So
that year I signed as a professional, even though technically I was in the second year of the YTS scheme, but we signed professional forms. So we were very much in between. We started off in the youth team, quickly got into the reserves. So I was training very much with the reserves and first team for most most of the time going forward.
Can I ask you about the transition then from reserves certainly into the first team, and how that worked for you at Leeds, and like the challenges, the barriers there?
Yeah, well, it was very much in the days where when you were a young player, you kept quiet and you spoke when you were spoken to. So obviously very nervous coming into the reserve arena, because at that time Leeds had a very big squad. There's only 2 players on the bench in the first team. So Leeds reserves was made up of ex-England internationals, people like David Rocastle, Steve Hodge, Scott Sellars. You know, there were some top players in the reserves that I was so fortunate to play with that really escalated my development astronomically. So I was kind of weaned into it that way. And then once you get into the first team, then you know you really are in the mix then. But it was very much in the days of just keep your head down, try and let your football do the talking, and you hope that the players respected you for the footballer that you were. And it was really, you know, your job as a young player to showcase everything you could do. Every time you trained, every time you played in the reserves, it was trying to showcase that you were good enough to at least be there.
And what type of character were you naturally at that time? Were you a confident, loud lad, or were you quieter? Or what?
No, I was confident. I always was able to back myself. I was always able to stand up for myself. I think football, certainly back then, from an early age, it opened you up to experiences that you have to back yourself, and you have to prove that you're good enough to be there, both from a football perspective, but also socially. And I think there's quite a lot of unofficial initiation situations where you come into an adult environment, certainly at elite level that was, where you're tested. And I think at that time in a career, it's as much about the social elements of being able to stand your ground in certain situations, which will give you then the confidence to remain in that arena.
Yeah, because it's going to be very difficult if you haven't got that confidence in the social situations. If you mentioned there about some of the players that you are training with and playing with on a regular basis. If you're sort of starstruck and you're potentially criticised by them at times, it would make things very challenging.
Yeah, and it's not easy. The first couple of times you train with the first team, you really don't know which way to go, because you're scared. What you don't want to do is be the overconfident young player that gets disrespected because you're a little bit big time. You're a bit of a big head. But by the same token, you don't want to be a shrinking violet where you think you're not good enough to be there. So it's very much I think it's a sink or swim situation, really. And I think managers get a lot when they throw young players in. They certainly find out a lot about young players when they train with the first team and what they've got about them as individuals.
Yeah, I'd imagine really you're trying to earn the respect of both the manager, the coaches, and the players through your attitude, the way you're talking.
Absolutely. I'll just tell you a story. When I first played for Leeds reserves, I played in the youth team a few times, scored a few goals. So I was then thrust into the reserves, and we played away at Barnsley. And the team was full of experienced players. And I didn't even get a game up front. They stuck me left midfield, and I'd never played left midfield in my career. And I just didn't play well at all. I was playing in a foreign position, really didn't know what I was doing. And I got dragged after half an hour. And I remember after the game, Nick Hennigan, who's the assistant manager at Leeds, he absolutely slaughtered me as if I'm not ready to be in that arena. I went back into the youth team, scored every week, and eventually they had to put me in the reserves up front. And it was where my natural position was, and it was luckily which led to me getting the first team opportunity. But it just goes to show that, you really do have to try and make an impact as soon as you can, because you don't get too many chances.
Tell me a little bit more about the playing out of position, because I can imagine, like, even throughout your career, you'll have been asked to play out of position on occasions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got no problem in playing that position. As I got older, I became more accustomed to playing in wide areas, particularly because I think quite a lot of strikers have to do that just to get minutes on the pitch at certain times. But this situation was very much this is your opportunity. You're playing left midfield. There was just situations where I was a natural striker, and when the team had a corner, I was defending because all the stars were in the team. They were all up for corners, and I was back on the halfway line defending, and it was just so foreign to me. But at that time, it was look, son, you better get with it here, else you're not going to be here for too long. And you have to find a way. You have to find a way, and you have to be adaptable, and you just have to find a way of adding value. And lucky enough, I did it. But it certainly wasn't that particular night away at Barnsley playing left midfield.
Yeah, it would be very easy to get in your own head as well if you know you've got like limited opportunities and you're playing out of position and potentially somewhere that you're not comfortable with. Yeah,
absolutely. It didn't work for me that night. But then, like I say, I went back into the youth team, carried on scoring goals, eventually played up front for the reserves, and I can't fully remember, but I must have done all right because towards the end of that season, I managed to get a few games in the first team.
Yeah, most definitely. There's certainly a lot of kids in Leeds area would love that opportunity, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive club. You only realise the size of the club when I left, weirdly enough, and I was playing for smaller clubs lower down the leagues. You only then realise what a huge club with a massive, passionate fan base that Leeds was and still is today.
Because when you broke through at Leeds, am I right in thinking you had Gordon Strachan, Gary McAllister, players like of that calibre in the team?
Yeah, David Batty, Gary Speed, Brian Dean. Yeah, I mean, the squad was littered. Tony DeRigo, the squad was littered with top players, that really good people as well that really helped my development.
Out of that group, is there anybody that springs to mind that had a big influence on your career?
Gordon Strachan, out of everybody that I've ever worked with, has probably had the most influence that I've with inside the game. I mean, I was a 17-year-old. He was a 36, 37-year-old coming towards the end of his career. And he was just so passionate, so influential, such an amazing role model. Just being around him just exuded excellence. And, everything about him was just first class.
So, in effect, you being around these players has brought your game on quite a lot, to say the least.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk these days because the reserve team structure has gone out of football that players aren't given the correct pathway of development into first team because they're going from youth team to under 23s, and then the next step is the first team and training with the first team, playing reserve games with and against first team players of high level. I genuinely believe that is what developed me as a young 17, 18-year-old into preparing me for the first team. And I think that's one reason why managers aren't as keen to promote young kids to the first team if they're only watching them in under 23s, around under 23s. It's not real football, so to speak, where you can't really get an insight whether that young player is ready for the first team.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, that does, because if you're seeing them training with these guys on a day in, day out basis and they're given opportunities as well, then yeah, it's a no-brainer, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
How difficult was it making that step up into the first team environment?
Well, I think there's a mindset of a young 18-year-old, which is different to the mindset of an experienced pro. So you go into it obviously very nervous, but there's a naivety about being a young player that I think is quite attractive when you're given a youngster an opportunity. And there's lots of positives. Whilst you get the naivety, you get the exuberance of youth, so to speak. And I think that was something that Howard Wilkinson, who was a manager back then, he saw that in people like me and Noel Whelan and Gary Kelly, Kevin Sharp, Mark Tinkler, Andy Cousins. There was quite a lot. And we all really were obviously babies in the football world, but we just got amongst it. We didn't show any fear. And that's one of the positives about it. I think as you get older as a professional, fear is probably the wrong word, but you can maybe overthink things, and you can maybe, analyze things too much. Whereas when you're 18, thrown into it, sink or swim, you have to be ready.
you just do it and go and try and showcase your skills.
Yeah.
All right, if we fast forward through your career a little bit, then you talk there about potentially overthinking. Was that a problem at all for you?
No, I don't think it was a problem. I just think with experience, you see the game and the profession in a slightly different light as you get older. I mean, the way I perceived football as an 18-year-old was completely different to how I perceived football as a 33-year-old. Because you've seen and heard every training session, you've heard every team talk. It's more about self-preservation, self-motivation, keeping your body in the right way, and just kind of surviving for as long as you can. When you're 18, you don't know what's coming, so to speak. You don't know what's ahead of you. So two very different mindsets that, as you go through from early years to the end, it evolves in that way.
Yeah, I suppose as a youngster, you've got your eyes on the next match, and potentially that's it, the next training session.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you progress, you realise that, all right, when my contract comes to an end, I've got a mortgage and I've got this needs to be paid, that needs to be paid. Right, it's a job. It's a job. And I think there's a big line that can be drawn when it goes from a hobby to a job. And when it's a job, and it's a great job, by the way, I'm not trying to diminish it or disrespect it. It's the best job in the world, but it is still a job, and things are expected of you, and you do need to perform. And if you don't, then you could be out of a job. And, occasionally I probably sailed close to the wind a couple of times. And then as I got a bit older, you become accustomed to it and you embrace it. But that's probably the best way I can describe it. When it's a job, different expectations placed upon you, and it's a different mindset.
So if we talk about the job there, and part of it can potentially be playing for 5, 6, 7, 10 clubs. And I know you travelled around a bit.
Or 13 there. In my case.
Exactly, yeah. So I imagine you settled in quite well in some clubs fairly quickly, and then other clubs it might have been more difficult. Do you want to just share some of those experiences? Yeah,
I mean, it's as I would become more experienced by going to different clubs and new dressing rooms, it became easier. Really, I was always and remain quite a confident person socially, so I never really had any problems ingratiate myself into a first team squad. Sometimes it was harder than others, based on different situations. You might come into a club where a manager's under pressure and you're straight in the first team. You might come into a club where you're not straight in the first team and you have to fight your way into the team. There's lots and lots of different dynamics. I mean, there's some dressing rooms I've played in that are absolutely fantastic, and we had great social lives. And there was other dressing rooms I played in where it was just really hard work and not particularly enjoyable. And you have to find a way. I think part of being a professional footballer is learning how to adapt and play within a team environment. And sometimes you have to just suck it up and get on with it, really. I mean, we'd all prefer to be in a great dressing room where we get on with everyone, but the reality is that doesn't happen. And there are people, nobody gets on with everybody, especially in the sporting environment that's so cutthroat. I mean, if you just take the average squad of 20 players, and I'm a striker, there's going to be 3 or 4 strikers, sometimes 5, maybe one that comes on loan. So your teammates are also your competition. Although it is a team sport, it's very much an individual mindset where, you are playing for yourself. I know that's not particularly the thing that is said in public very often, but any footballer will tell you, you have to create your own career and you have to be single-minded, and that creates a certain mindset, and it's all about survival.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that I suppose that single-minded mindset
Yeah, because I mean, I've gone to clubs and they've had, say, 3 or 4 strikers. Well, I need to be one of those 2 strikers in the first team. So although these guys are my teammates, I have to find a way of elevating myself or adding value to the team or the squad to make sure that I'm in that starting lineup. Because if I am and I'm scoring goals, things are great, and I'll get a new contract or a move. And if not, then I'll be out and I'll have to find somewhere else. And things are slightly less certain. So I'll give you a story, not my story, but a really good friend of mine, club. I won't give you his name or the club, but he was a central midfielder, quite combative, bit of a tackler, but could play. And he got suspended, and he was out the team for 3 or 4 games. And he came back, and he didn't get straight back in the team. They had a few. They might have won a couple of games. He needed to be in that team. He went to see the manager, and he said, "Right, I am going to, in training, go around kicking every single midfielder until you put me back in the team. Just want to let you know, I want to get back in this team. I'm going to go around kicking everyone until they're either injured or you get me back in the team." So, a couple of aspects to that. One, the manager absolutely loved that type of attitude. Loved it. Because that's him saying, I want to play for you, I want to be in that team. And 2, what a strong mindset, single-minded to make sure he's back in that team. And he was within 2 weeks. It might not be politically correct, but he's there as an individual to make the most of his career. And the longer he's out the team, the more unpredictable things can be.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. He's certainly shown the desire. Yeah. I suppose I'm questioning the fact he's going to go around kicking his teammates, mind you. But yeah.
Maybe it was just a threat.
But yeah,
or not.
Yeah, depending on his character. But ultimately, yeah, it is sending that message to the manager, isn't it? That I really want to be there, and I'm going to do anything I can to prove you're wrong.
And just while I'm on that, I think as a player, I've sort of really learnt this towards the end of my career, and even since retired. I never saw managers as human beings. I always saw them as this very strong alpha male type character. I think what I learnt as I got older and into my late years and since retirement, managers are human, and when they pick a team, they want to pick a team on people they trust and they can rely on. And they would happily, I think, compensate for somebody that's not as good, that they know will give them a solid 7 out of 10 every week, than somebody that gives them a 3 out of 10 one week, a 10 out of 10 one week, a 4 out of 10 the week after, a 9 out of 10. So when you realise that managers are human, you then tailor your approach and go, well, they just want somebody they can trust. So I'm going to be that guy that they can trust. So I'm going to work hard. You see things a little bit differently, or I did.
At the end of the day, the manager's job, again, is very cutthroat as well, isn't it? So like you say, they are going to rely on those players who can give them a consistent performance.
Absolutely.
I've worked with a few different players around this, actually, where you talk about just like dealing with managers and dealing with coaches, because they've just created a persona that the manager is untouchable, and I'm frightened to go and talk to them. What were your relationships like with managers? How did you deal with problems?
Well, whether it's the era that I played in, but from as I was younger, as I got older, managers became more approachable. Now, is that because in the early 90s, managers were that type and not approachable? And as time evolved, managers were educated and trained on how to deal with players better. So they opened themselves up to be more approachable, perhaps. On the whole, I would say less managers were approachable, where you could have an adult conversation. They would use the conversation against you in some way. I never really felt the opportunity to be able to open up completely to managers. Hardly ever. So
that's something a young player would certainly have to bear in mind. I mean, if you're trying to prove yourself to get into the first team, you do need to have some sort of relationship with the manager.
Yeah, and what I would probably do now, and it's easy saying as someone that's been retired for a number of years and can look back on everything, but there'd be times in my career if I was out of the team, I would not have any conversation with the manager. One, because the manager doesn't want to speak. Really, he doesn't want me to put him on the spot. And I would very much now be proactive in finding reasons why I'm not playing, what can I work on, and really keeping that conversation going with the manager and really put it on them to tell me why I'm not in the team, what do I need to work on. If I was a young player starting out, that would be something that I would recommend to young players to do, just to give them more of an idea and keep the conversation going. Although some managers are just not open to these conversations.
So it's choosing your battles, I suppose, in that respect. But certainly, if you are brave enough to have that conversation, then it can only be helpful, I would have thought, because at least a manager can read you and they know exactly what you're thinking inside, and they know you're motivated.
Yes, I think that it's more that they know that you want to improve and they want to develop, and every manager wants to hear that from players, especially young players.
Can I just ask you the question as well about who you would say the biggest influence has been on your life and your career?
Definitely my parents. From a very, very young age, they were very, very supportive, taking me to training, taking me to matches. I've got amazing memories of my dad taking me to the park and just constantly just kicking a ball with me, heading, kicking, controlling, shooting. If it wasn't for my parents, I wouldn't have had a career, 100%. And it's very easy to say, but they were never overly pushy. And I think the perception of parents these days is they're supportive, but they're pushy. And you need to get the balance right. You know, if you're over pushing and over protective, you can run the risk of turning young people off the game. So I was very fortunate that my parents had the balance right between supporting me and not being over pushy.
Yeah, after all, a parent's job is to be supportive, be loving towards their children, aren't they? So yeah, like you said, it is a tough balance, but that's certainly got to be borne in mind.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, there's lots of story. I mean, unfortunately for young players, the odds are very much stacked against them in having a career. So there's very much a mindset that needs to come in that, listen, this is great if it happens, but it may not. And I think it's something that needs to be thought about all the way through from a young age. That look, I'd really be great if I could be a professional footballer, but there's a chance it might not happen. And I'm going to kind of keep that about me at all times.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, that, because if you think about it, when you go through the school system, you know, when you're either 16 or you're 18, you're out of here. But and the reality is, if you go through the academy system, then there's a 99% chance that you are out of here, and then that's it. But people have the perception, actually, no, I'm actually here for good.
They do, and I think they're sold a dream, and it's quite contradictory coming from somebody that's been there and done it. So it feels quite negative, or could be perceived as negative, coming from someone that's been fortunate enough to have a career, telling people that they shouldn't believe that they can do it. And it's not really the message. The message is you've got to believe in yourself, and you've got to give it everything. But there's a chance this might not work for you. And I think that would certainly help with people coming out the game at a young age and how to go about dealing with life in general moving forwards.
Yeah, so they've actually got some sort of contingency plan going forward, once they do leave the game.
Yeah, I mean, if you just think, I mean, every footballer will have their career finished at some point. Even if you're very lucky and you get to 35, there is still the rest of your life to live. And you know, the 0.1% of the people that play football that don't have to work again or don't, you know, financially secure, there are another 95 probably plus people that have had a career, 1 year, 2 years, 15 years, and still have to work again, which is fine. I mean, the average career is 8 years, which is staggering. So, you know, it tells you everything you need to know. The numbers are really not great, but at the same time, you've got to try and achieve your dreams.
Yeah, and like you say, you certainly don't want to close people off to to having that dream and that long-term goal is, there's just got to be some sort of reality around it. And maybe with academies as well, where it can get a bit tricky is people throw all their eggs in one basket, where it's just football, football, football. Whereas if they were interested in other sports, it might help that balance.
Well, I was lucky enough. I was a bit of a sport billy when I was younger, so I played everything. I played cricket, I played basketball, I played tennis, I played golf. I did athletics, obviously football, and I think it helped. I think it helped me not to have too much of a focus. Obviously, there comes a time when you sort of leave school that you have to really narrow things down, which I was more than happy to do. But up until the age of 14, 15, I played everything, and I think it helped with not being overburdened with football, and it also helped my coordination as an athlete. So I'd recommend that to anybody starting out. Absolutely.
So on that score, in terms of recommendations, then I'd like you to rack your brains now and think about three key takeaways from our conversation that would help young footballers certainly make their way in the game. Okay,
so it sounds a little bit brutal, but the first one, find a way to stand out from the crowd. Whether that's in training or in matches, you have to find a way to stand out from the crowd. So when you're playing under 15 games, under 16 games, whether it's by going around kicking people, or whether it's by scoring goals, or whether it's by crossing it in 20 times a match, you have to find a way within training and matches to stand out very quickly. The second thing would be you've got to learn very quickly. We're all given, nowadays, players are given probably more time than they've ever been with under 23s. But time is not your friend. Time is not on your side. And it's imperative that you learn quick, listen to the coaches, because you need, when you leave school and come into the full-time arena, you really need to develop very, very quickly, and if you want to be a first-team player. And the third thing I would say is apply yourself correctly and give it everything you've got, because what you don't want to do is have regrets. We've all got regrets, but if you can come out of football even at the age of 35 or even 19 or 21 or whatever age, and you've applied yourself correctly and you've given anything, I think at least you can hold your head up high and know that you give it your best shot.
And those three key takeaways really apply to life in general as well, don't they? In some respects, if you're going to be successful.
I think, without going too deep, I think football, fortunately, has really instilled so many really fantastic values that I've took on throughout my life and into retirement. Luckily, I've been in an era where we weren't wrapped in cotton wool. We had to find the answers and we had to find a way. There wasn't a great deal of support of any description, really. And that kind of opened me up and people of my era to things that young players don't have to do necessarily these days. But I think I'm glad I did, and it made me mature quickly and grow up quickly, and I'd probably say be a better person.
That's great. That is. Do you want to actually tell the listeners a little bit about where you are now and what it is that you actually do?
Yeah. So representing an education organisation that deliver sports qualifications to coaches in the sports market. So if anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn and find any more about me, that would be more than useful.
And you're also an ambassador for the Sports Business Club as well.
Yeah, so obviously you and I met via the Sports Business Club, something really kind of unique that's been set up in this pandemic. Lots of business people are now coming together to grow their network, but out of the membership, there's a large chunk of it that goes back into grassroots football. So it's a very positive group that want to do. They want to gain more business, understandably. They also want to promote grassroots sport. And right now, in the middle of this pandemic, there's lots of grassroots sports clubs, football and otherwise, that need all the help, certainly financially, that they can get. So great to be a part of.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. It's a fantastic idea. And what I'll do in the show notes, I'll put some links to your social media there, as well as the coaching business and the sports business club. I appreciate your insights. They've been
No worries.
Fantastic. So yeah, big thank you, Jamie.
No worries.
Having supported a number of young footballers and rugby players over the last few years who've been trying to break into first teams in the lower leagues and at the top level, this area has really, really fascinated me. I've seen some of the challenges that they've had to overcome, some of the difficulties they have with coaches or in the dressing room, when they've been dropped or when they just get small amounts of game time. And after listening to Jamie's experiences there and some of the advice that he's shared, I'm sure there's a lot of footballers, coaches, rugby players who'll get an awful lot out of this podcast. So please share away, send it to your friends, to your teammates, to various different coaches. And also what you might want to do is check out our website. Under the freebies section, I've got a resource called the Focused Athlete Checklist. As we've talked about, there's an awful lot can go wrong. There's an awful lot of challenges that you can face as an athlete. And this checklist has got some nice foundations which you can go back to from time to time to make sure that you're doing the right things to keep yourself on track. Please go ahead and download it. And also feel free again to share it to your friends and any teammates that might benefit from it. I'd like to give a big thanks to today's sponsors, Functional Intelligent Training, who are a sports injury clinic located in Gosforth, near Newcastle upon Tyne, and specialise in athlete development, nurturing future champions, strength and conditioning support, and excellent rehabilitation services. Thank you for listening to Demystifying Mental Toughness today. To sign up for tips and advice to help you be the best that you can be, go to www.sport-excellence.co.uk and sign up to the Mental Edge newsletter.